All right, well, hey everybody. This is Benji with Dallas Jewish Conservatives. Hope everyone is doing well. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your Sunday to join myself and my dear friend Evan Sayet. We're so honored to have him, and we're going to be presenting the systems of socialism, nationalism, and you with Evan Sayet. I don't know if y'all are like me, but I've kind of lost track of how many days we've been in quarantine and lockdown here, and I need a haircut, so forgive the long hair. I don't know if anyone else is dealing with the same issue, but I know it's been a crazy time for everybody, and hopefully we can start back up business in Texas and Dallas soon in a safe and efficient way. And I really appreciate everyone being here. Before we get started, I wanted to just go over a couple of house rules, DJC house rules, as I call them. Please keep your audio muted during the program at all times. And if you have a question, please send all of your questions to the chat box that you'll see on Zoom. Feel free to ask as many as you'd like. I promise I will get to every single one of them, and that'd be great. And other than that, feel free to, of course, enjoy the program. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our featured speaker, Evan Sayet. Evan brings his conservatism to the country in a variety of different ways. He's an author and columnist, political humorist, and speechwriter for President Trump. His lecture to the Heritage Foundation, which Andrew Breitbart called one of the 5 most important conservative speeches ever given, remains the single most viewed lecture in Heritage Foundation history. His article, He Fights, in defense of President Trump, is the most read article in Town Hall's history, while his latest book, Apocalypse Now, debuted as the #1 new release in America on Amazon's political humor category for 4 straight weeks. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce Evan Sayet. Thanks, Evan, for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Benji. As much as I appreciate your gratitude for my being here, you're actually doing me a favor as well, in that it's giving me an opportunity to hear the words of my upcoming book come out of my mouth so that I can debate it in my own head, and also so that there'll be questions at the end for things that I've left out or things that I need to clarify before I go ahead and publish the book in, I'm hoping, perhaps 6 weeks.
Nice.
I struggle to know what to call this book. As of right now, I'm calling it Hitler Was Woke Too, and in parentheses, sort of. And why another book? Why another lecture on socialism? In discussing socialism with my friends, my colleagues, my contemporaries, people I'm trying to influence, I find they tend to make a single and major mistake, which is they think of socialism as an ideology. And it's not an ideology, it's a system upon which any number of ideologies can then operate. But when you think of socialism as an ideology, you run into a problem when you try to do what I'm going to do here, which is to compare Hitlerism and National Socialism, along with Soviet socialism, Cuban socialism, every form of socialism, because I'm not talking about the ideology, I'm talking about the system. So let me be abundantly clear, because it's always, and rightly so, a red flag when somebody just invokes the name of Hitler, given his singular evil. But I am not comparing democratic socialism to Hitlerism. That's the ideology. I'm talking about the system of socialism that it is so obvious that the National Socialists employed that most Democrats don't even try to deny it any longer, right? So let's start with the obvious point that Hitler was in fact a socialist, all right? It's an awfully hard thing to try to deny when the name of your movement is the German National Socialist Party, Workers' Party. And I don't think anybody would disagree that his government controlled either directly through ownership or de facto through regulation every part of the German economy and culture. Of course, Hitler was a socialist. In fact, the Democrats don't even try to deny this much any longer. Instead, they say he was the wrong kind of socialist. Right? They're a different kind of socialist because they're talking again about ideology, not about system. See, Hitler, they say, was a national socialist, the emphasis being on his nationalism. They're different because they're democratic socialists. The problem is there is no systemic difference. There's no difference in the system between democratic socialism and national socialism. Right? The modifiers that the democratic socialists employ don't actually change the system that they equally embrace. Right? The word democratic and democratic socialism doesn't refer to an ideology. It only refers to the means by which the people intend to first come to power. So these socialists will come to power democratically, but once elected, they will be socialists. Right? The fact that the word national appears in National Socialist, meanwhile, no more proves Hitler to have been a nationalist than the fact that LeBron James plays basketball in the National Basketball Association. Right? James is too good a basketball player to play in a local or regional basketball association, so he plays in the National Basketball Association. Hitler was too good a socialist to lead just a local or regional socialist, so he led the National Socialist Party. Right? It's not the Nationalist Socialist Party, it's the National Socialist Party. No more proving Hitler to have been a nationalist than the members of the Democratic National Committee or the National Academy for Motion Picture Arts and Sciences or the National Sewing Club, for that matter. Again, it's not the nationalist socialist movement. It was nationalist socialist movement. It was the National Socialist movement. Right? In fact, Hitler tried to take over the world. Right? People who want to destroy borders and create a one world governance are called globalists. The people who try to stop them from taking over the world and destroying borders, the people who seek to preserve their national sovereignty to protect those borders, they're called nationalists. All right? And this is actually the fight that's been going on in one form or another for 100 years now, since the theory of socialism, Marxist theory, turned to flesh and blood with the Russian Revolution, which corresponded almost exactly to America's rise to power, arrival on the world scene post-World War I. Right? So it's, even now, the battle in America in what's called the Culture War is a battle between the nationalists, those of us who wish to protect American sovereignty, and the globalist socialists. All right, socialism is globalism is endemic to socialism. It's built right into Marx's original his original theory, his manifesto. Right? Marx didn't, in his call to action, his ultimate call to action, he didn't say for the people of Russia or the workers of Russia to unite. He called for the workers of the world to unite in what he intended to be a globalist revolution. So to this part, I think we can at least agree that Hitler was a no borders, one world globalist who sought to employ the system of socialism, which is exactly what the democratic socialist is today. Thus far, and while not all globalists are socialists. All right, throughout time, there have been lots of megalomaniacs, and there have been certainly other ideologies. Islamicism comes to mind, that is globalist, a global caliphate. But all socialists are globalists. All right, in fact, it really, while this controlling the world sounds sort of only the thing that the megalomaniacs and crazy people would want to do, the reality is it's the end game of every socialist ideology. Every ideology that's attached to socialism, whether it was screamed with vicious vitriol like Hitler, whether it's delivered in a market-tested soundbite like Elizabeth Warren, or even if it's put to a happy tune like John Lennon. Right? John Lennon's Imagine, which is not an old song that I'm grasping out of antiquity. I mean, it remains so relevant today that CNN made it the last song the world would hear before they ushered in the new year. And of course, sorry about that, that was visually disturbing. But and of course, the leftists in Hollywood all got together and sang it in their various bathrooms to make us all feel good and united during this coronavirus epidemic. Right? In Imagine, John Lennon lays out the three pillars of socialism. That there be no possessions, which is a bit of a misstatement. They never mean no possessions. What they mean is that the government controls all possessions. Of course, we'll still have cars and homes and iPhones, but it'll be owned by the government and then redistributed at their whim. So there'll be no possessions, no countries, right? No countries and no religions, right? No possessions or government-controlled possessions is the essence, it's the centerpiece, it's the entirety of socialist economic system. Right? No countries is the definition of globalism. And of course, every socialist entity from day one has had a virulent antipathy for God and religion, including today's democratic socialists with their militant atheism. Now, what the democratic socialist believes is that by eliminating possessions, we'll eliminate the need for greed and hunger. That's what Lenin promises in the song, right? Without countries, xenophobia and wars for acquisition and glory will no longer be. And without a God, without religion, there will be none of the self-righteousness that leads to oppression and bigotry. I mean, it really is a hopeful. These are not bad people. What they imagine is rather hopeful. The problem is the three pillars that Lenin lays out, the three pillars of socialism, also just happen to be the three pillars of authoritarianism and totalitarianism, right? Without possessions, the individual doesn't have the resources to stand up to government oppression. Without nations, there are no other entities strong enough to stand up to the global government. And without religion, there's no moral authority that supersedes the orders of the global dictators, because they have total power. And now without a God, they are the ultimate moral authorities. They are the ones who determine right and wrong within. And so really what we have to count on and hope for is that with the authoritarianism and with the totalitarianism, with their socialist economic system and with their globalist structure, the ideology of today's socialists won't allow those horrible things to happen that all the other socialist nations have done that we associate with them, including that of the National Socialists. Even if you believe that a one world, no borders, no possession, godless world is tenable, possible, much less the idea that it is utopian, there's still the problem that every one of these other socialist utopian ideologies, because they were utopian in their own ways, they had a different vision of what utopia would be, but they were like today's Democrats, they were global utopians. But even if you believe that the utopia that they imagine will be a world without greed and hunger, a world without all the other things that John Lennon promised, there's still the ugly business of how do we get from here to there? Because the democratic socialist has to find a way to vanquish all of the people who do believe in the right to the fruits of their own labor, the capitalists, and they still have to vanquish all the people who recognize and appreciate the protections that national sovereignties bring. And they also have to get rid of every person of faith from around the globe, if not by Holocaust, then certainly by oppression and being quieted. How do you get from here to there? Now, we don't know how the democratic socialist intends to do it, but we do know that he has to do it. In order to create the paradise for all of us to live as one, all of the wrong people have to be in some way vanquished. And while we don't know exactly what the democratic socialists plan, they never quite tell us. Lenin left it out of his 3-minute ditty. You know, he just went from what the world is today to your imagination. And the college professor doesn't quite tell you the horrors that must be committed, because the socialist paradise is always just a couple 100 million murders away. Well, we don't know what the democratic socialist intends. We do know what every other socialist regime has done prior to them. All right, the Russians went with gulags and exile to frozen tundra, and the German socialists went with death camps and work camps and ovens. The Chinese socialists sought to save money on infrastructure and whatnot, so they went with the low-tech killing fields of mass starvation. But we do know that every socialist entity until now has had to commit those kinds of atrocities, And in order to get from here to there, and even the lovely John Lennon song, there has to be that middle part where the people who believe in the rights to the fruits of their own labor, who believe in the protections of national sovereignty, who believe in the moral leadership of a religion, must be vanquished. Now, one of the problems that people run into in thinking about this and comparing democratic socialism to Hitler's socialism, to National Socialism, or to Lenin's and Stalin's socialism, are these atrocities. I mean, it's really hard for us to imagine our friends and our neighbors and our colleagues and engaging in this degree of atrocity. We tend to associate these atrocities with the other theologies, the other ideologies, all right? But it's not the ideology of Hitlerism, it's not the ideology of Leninism, it's not the ideology of Maoism that led to gulags and death camps and killing fields, right? Who they sent there depended on their ideology. But their existence was a requirement because they had to find some way on the way to utopia to get rid of the people who stand between them and paradise. If Hitler could have snapped his fingers and accomplished the same thing that the camps did, if Lenin and Stalin and Mao could have snapped their fingers and accomplished the same things as the gulags and the killing fields did, they would have. Well, today's democratic socialists can't snap their fingers or blink their eyes and make it happen. But what they can do is flip a switch or write a couple of lines of code. See, what you have to recognize, excuse me, is that death camps and gulags, they were all primitive aspects, but they were all the same idea as the cancel culture. They needed to find a way to cancel those who didn't fit into the movement. And while in previous decades and generations, the technology wasn't available to cancel people by any other means than massacre, genocide, and Holocaust, today's democratic socialist has the means to cancel us without trains, without camps, without these things. They can cancel us via social media. They can cancel us by a campaign of vitriol that costs us our jobs. They have the technical skill to accomplish the same end, but without the same gruesome techniques. And in fact, this is exactly what Orwell warned about in 1984. Right? Orwell didn't think that authoritarian and totalitarianism created those things. Let me walk that back a little bit. It wasn't socialism that one more time. Sorry, this is the first time I'm giving this talk. So what Orwell recognized is that authoritarian and totalitarianism are built into the socialist system. He wasn't warning us about authoritarianism and totalitarianism. He was warning us about socialism. Right? And even Marx understood that in order to get from here to there, the killing fields and the canceling out, that's not the end game of their ideology. Their ideology is when we're done with the process, we will have a utopia. Now, the Islamicist vision of a utopia is different than Mao's vision of utopia, which is different than Hitler's vision of utopia, which is different than the democratic socialist vision of utopia. But they all knew that between here and there had to be the process, or what Thomas Sowell calls the process costs of committing these kinds of atrocities, or at least canceling out in one way anybody and everybody who stands between you and paradise. Now, the reason that socialists feel compelled to both invade, because there's the three things you get with socialism no matter what is invasion, oppression, and atrocity. And for a very simple reason, socialism is a supremacist system. In order to believe that you have the one way that if only everybody ascribed to your or shared your traits, the world would be paradise, that is a supremacist ideology. Now, the German socialists the trait that made them supreme, that would bring about paradise, was Aryanism. All right. In Marxism and Leninism, it was class-based. So it was race-based in Germany. It was class-based it's religion-based in Islamicism. And what it's based on, what supremacism is based on, what makes the democratic socialist believe that he's the supreme supremacist, is because he believes his ideology is supreme. And I explained that ideology in my previous work, The Kindergarten of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks. I have to assume with the speed that I'm talking, I'm probably going to have time to discuss their ideology just a little bit down the way. But again, the ideology for the moment is irrelevant. It is the socialist system, and the socialist system is the system embraced because it's globalist, and it's because only a handful of elite are in control of everything. It is a supremacist ideology. Now, what makes the democratic socialist think that he is supreme? Well, they have a word for the supreme being in Marxism. It's the proletariat. They have a name for the supreme being in Nazi Germany, German socialism. They call him the Aryan. All right, I'll discuss what the ideology and what makes them supreme in the democratic socialist mind in a moment, but they too have a word for the supreme being. They call them the woke. And if you are a member of the woke, you are one of the supreme beings who will bring about paradise. And if you're not a member of the woke, then you are the person standing between creating, in fact, all of the world's evils. It's because of you that paradise doesn't exist. You need to be canceled in order to get to the supreme paradise, which may look different depending on which socialist ideology, which ideology is embracing socialism, but exists no matter what ideology embraces that socialism. So one of the reasons that the democratic socialists, the socialists in general, Nazis, the Soviets, feel compelled to constantly invade, why they think they have the right to be globalist, why they think they have the right to take over the world, is present in all of the other ideologies. It's because they have the supremacist notion, and that if you do not comport to those traits, then they have the right to cancel you in one way or another. Both at home in America and internationally, nationalism stands between, nationalism is the opposite, is the bulwark against every supremacist movement that's out there. Because nationalism bases rights and protections on common citizenship and not on any of these other traits, not race like the Germans, not class like the Russians, not religion like the Islamicists, but if you share this common terrain. So what the nationalist believes is this: the world with its 8 billion people, its 7,200 languages, its 4,200 religions, along with a whole host of further complicating realities like various and varying climates, weather, soil, topography, resources. The world is just too big and too complex for the simple one-size-fits-all of socialist rule, even on a national level, but certainly when it attempts to expand like the European Union, and least of all, worst of all, on a global scale. In order for one size to fit all, everyone must be either the same size. Those who complain about ill-fitting policy must be quieted through oppression. And those who refuse to be quieted must be canceled in one way or another, typically up till now, through atrocity. In the world of the socialists, the world is always divided into two. It is inherently, it is written in their scripture, the Marxist manifesto. But the world is comprised of two kinds of people: us versus them, us being the superior who will create utopia once them is gone. And then once again, who the us and who the them are changes, is different depending on ideology. The us and the them to Hitler was different than the us and them to Lenin, was different than the us and the them to Maduro and Kim and so on. But it is inherently and written into scripture, the Marxist manifesto, that it's us against them, typically described as the oppressed and the oppressors. And once the oppressors are vanquished, then the formerly oppressed will create this paradise because they possess the supreme traits. So on an international level, they have the right to invade in order to create this global socialist system. And on the national level, whereas the nationalist protects rights based on common citizenship, they base rights and protections based only on your exhibiting and promoting the superior traits that make them supreme in the first place. For example, a Jew in Germany could not appeal to the authorities based on his common citizenship. Right? A member of the bourgeoisie in Russia could not appeal to the Russian government for equal rights based on his common citizenship. An infidel in Iran could not appeal for equal rights based on his common Iranian citizenship. All rights and protections are afforded 100% to those who possess the supreme traits, and not at all to those who do not. And we can see this in America when you look at the way that the two different systems, the nationalist system and the democratic socialist system, behaves at their rallies and protests when they're protesting equally convinced of their righteous grievances. Right? The Tea Party movement with almost 1 million people on the lawn in Washington, D.C. They didn't litter, they didn't vandalize, they didn't intimidate, and they certainly didn't take away the rights of the people with whom they wholeheartedly disagree. All right, they didn't block their right of way by blocking traffic. They didn't hinder or infringe upon their freedom of speech or freedom of assembly. But reverse it and look, whenever a democratic socialist protests his seemingly or that he believes are his righteous grievances, it is scripted. It is planned in advance that they're going to block traffic and deny me my right of way. It is planned in advance and is designed to stop people like Ben Shapiro from having the freedom of speech to address others on campuses, and to deny those others on campuses their freedom of peaceful assembly. So even in America, this dichotomy of us versus them exists. And even in America, the democratic socialist believes only he has the right to rights and protections, the rights to free speech, the rights to assemble, the rights, while anybody who disagrees with him, who gets in the way of the movement, has no rights at all. And by the way, it doesn't even take very much for them to violate your rights. All you need to do is wear a red hat. And you don't have the right of the freedom of speech of your apparel. You don't have the right to the right of way. They'll come up to your face and bang a drum in it like they did to the kid from Kentucky. In fact, this us versus them is not just, well, we think we're right and we respect your opinion, but you're wrong. It is actually deep and abiding hatred for those who stand between them and the utopia they envision. Right? And it's hard to deny that if you look at and you listen to the Trump haters out there and the people who support President Trump, this is undeniably hatred that the democratic socialist has. It's the same hatred that the Aryans had for the Jews. It's the same hatred that the proletariat had for the bourgeoisie. It is the same hatred for the other, and it's based very much on the same dichotomy, but also that they're all utopian ideologies. Again, what that utopia would look like, Marx's workers' paradise would look different than Hitler's 1,000-year reign, which would look different than the global caliphate that the religion of peace is going to ultimately bring after they finish the process of killing the rest of us, right? And it comes from, in this dichotomy, since they believe that if they were in charge, they would create paradise, that makes them sort of God. Only God is so perfect that just by being himself, he can create the Garden of Eden. Right? Further, since those who do not share this quality are the cause of man's fall or the cause of man's not returning to Eden, those who aren't woke are nothing less than the devil himself. And while this might sound like hyperbole, and the democratic socialist won't tend to use the word God to describe himself or the devil to describe everybody else, he does use and uses often to describe himself the secular version of God and the devil. They call themselves love, and those who would disagree with them are hate. And therefore, since their love, their hatred of hate is not only justifiable, but it's a moral obligation. And even when they don't use words like love and hate, they might not call us Lucifer, because Lucifer is too religious a reference. They will incessantly invoke the name of Lucifer, incarnate the most evil human being they can conceive of, which is why Bush was Hitler, and Reagan was Hitler, and Giuliani was Hitler, and you're Hitler, and I'm Hitler, and everybody who disagrees, who gets in the way of the socialist movement, is not merely a good, decent person who happens to be wrong. They're not even a bad person who's wrong. They are evil incarnate. They see it as their love, and we are hate. They don't even hide this fact. They put it on their campaign literature. It was the slogan upon which the most recent democratic socialist, Hillary Clinton, ran for president. And so this hate is deep and abiding and could not be, and is not, you cannot mitigate it through anything because it's based on whether you possess the right trait or not. You look at the Democratic Party's, you know what, let me do this at this point. How am I doing on time? I'm guessing that was 20 so far, Benji?
Oh, you're good. You're 135. It's 135 right now. You're good.
Oh, so that was 30 something. That was 35 minutes already.
Keep rolling.
Wow. All right. Well, let me just get very quickly to what it is the ideology is behind the new socialist movement, because I want to stipulate now that it is not only not Hitlerism, it is the polar opposite of Hitlerism. And while this is seemingly reassuring, it really shouldn't be on two counts. One, polar opposites tend to have more in common with each other than they do with things in the middle. The North Pole and the South Pole are quite literally polar opposites, and yet they have more in common with each other than either one does with the equator. Further, because the ideology is the opposite of Hitler's, they have a supremacist bent to themselves, because if Hitler was the worst person there ever was and we're the opposite, then we must be the best people that there ever were. So what makes the democratic socialist ideology the supreme ideology, what it is they believe that gives them the right to take over the world and to take all of our possessions and to determine what gods we believe in and so on, where every other supremacist movement said something is better, in fact, superior to and supreme to something and everything else. All right, the Marxists, the Leninists said that this class, the proletariat, was better than the other classes. Hitler said this race, the Aryan race, is better than all of the other races. The Islamicist says that Islam is better, and especially their interpretation of Islam is better than the other religions. Well, the great novelty of the democratic socialist ideology is that in order to never again have those horrible things that supremacism brings, they're going to say they believe that nothing is better than anything else. No culture, no religion, no forms of government, no body shape, no gender, no familial construct. They must start and end their beliefs with the idea that everything is equally good and equally right. And some of you who are fans of mine will recognize this as the thesis of the Kindergarten of Eden, how the modern liberal thinks. And the problem with it, well, what they think that they're accomplishing is that by eliminating discriminating thought, by eliminating discrimination, which is, by the way, what happens when you have no countries, no religions, and no possessions that you get to discriminate with, how you intend to spend it. They believe that by eliminating discriminating thought, they will eliminate the evils of discrimination. Right? It's only when you think something's right, that you're right, might you then go and commit an oppression against somebody. If everybody's equally right, there's no reason to invade. If everybody's equally right, then there is no supremacist movement. The problem is that by eliminating rational judgment, the leftist, the democratic socialist, doesn't eliminate judgment. Obviously, he's incredibly judgmental against the unwoke, and he doesn't eliminate discrimination. He discriminates against the unwoke. We don't get any rights. The woke get everything. So what they've done is only eliminate the reasoning behind their judgments and their discriminations. In other words, by eliminating discriminating thought, they haven't eliminated belief. And the way I worded it in the original book, and I can't believe I'm fumbling it over it now because I've given that speech 100 times, whereas again, this is the first time I'm giving this one. Indiscriminateness of thought does not lead to indiscriminateness of beliefs. Indiscriminateness of thought leads invariably and inevitably to siding with evil over good, wrong over right, ugly over beautiful, profane over profound, failure over success. Why? Because if no culture, no religion, no forms of government, if no body shape, if no familial construct, if nothing is better than anything else, then success is unjust. Why should a person, a culture, a nation, a religion, a family, why should it succeed if it's not better than anything else? And the flip side of this is that failure, as proved by nothing other than the fact that it has failed, is proof positive to the democratic socialist that somehow the failure has been victimized. So not only is there no intelligence, rational thought, discriminating thought behind their judgments are all pre-judgments. They know in advance. For example, when they argue and they try to prove that America is not exceptional, it's not because they've studied it and done comparative studies and in the end read through the histories of the world and decided that America isn't exceptional. They start with the conclusion that America isn't exceptional. And then they find themselves in the impossible position of trying to explain America's success, given that America is nothing special. Well, if America is nothing special, not only is our success unjust, but given that we are the most successful nation in human history, the injustice that we are must be the greatest injustice in all of human history. This is why the nation of the democratic socialists most despises, first and foremost despises, creates propaganda against, is the United States, not because we're not exceptional, but because if we're not exceptional, the only explanation for the undeniable success of our nation is that we are a great and unparalleled, unprecedented injustice. And by the way, there's a reason that the nation that the democratic socialists hate and target most, secondly, the second most hated, is the tiny liberal democracy of Israel. Now, you would think that the democratic socialists would adore the state of Israel. I mean, we're talking about a nation where there was a woman prime minister all the way back in the 60s. Right? We're talking about a nation where the freedom of religion, where there are gay pride parades. right? Where there are Islamic members of Israel's parliament. You would think they would love this liberal democracy, but they don't, because they don't think about these good things. They're indiscriminate. Israel is nothing special. And if Israel is nothing special, how do you explain their success? How do you explain the miraculous fact that of all the nations in the world, there's China, there's America, and the tiny little Israel with companies listed on the NASDAQ? How do you explain the symphony orchestras? That there's only two possible explanations. Either there is something special about the Jewish heritage, the Jewish culture, the Jewish religion, the Ten Commandments, or there isn't. But before they've even begun to think, because they don't think, everything they believe is prejudice. They've taken off even the possibility that Israel's success is due to their goodly and godly behavior, their better moral choices. And that leaves them only to believe that, that Israel's miraculous success is because of a miraculous size injustice. It's why, of all the nations in the world, with all the terrible things that are happening and the oppressions, they won't even rally behind the folks in Hong Kong, all right? But they will rally against the Jews of Israel, not because they're classic anti-Semites, which they are, and I explain that later in my book. I perhaps should have tailored this talk, instead of going from page 1 to page 20 or whatever I'm doing, skip ahead to explain why Judaism, of all the religions that socialism hates, and it hates them all, no religions, right? Religion is the opiate of the masses. There's still a singular and focused hatred that socialist regimes, from Hitler's final solution to the Jews, to what we used to call Soviet Jewry, to the BDS movement on leftist campuses, there's a singular hatred that the Democratic, and Benji, you look like I'm running out of time. How am I doing on time?
You're good.
Good. Thumbs up will work. All right. There's a singular hatred and a singular focus on Judaism, no matter the socialist movement. And it goes back to the 3 pillars of socialism that the lovely, I'm telling you, I've met the man, John Lennon, laid out. No countries, well, Israel, not only now, but from its inception, was a nation. We talked about the Israeli nation, the Hebrew nation. It's also a religion, obviously. And if there's one thing that the Jews consider to be the most immoral, the worst, it is slavery. It is the confiscating of other people's labor that is known as slavery. In fact, when God first made his appearance and first offered his bona fides, he didn't say, I'm the person who created the universe. I'm the entity that created the universe. All right? He didn't give that as his bona fides. He didn't give his bona fides, I gave life to man. What he said was, I'm the one who just got you released from bondage. Because bondage and slavery are so antithetical to the Jewish way that socialism, which is slavery, is the confiscation of other people, the fruits of other people's labors. In return, the democratic socialist today provides pretty much the same thing that the slave owner did, by the way, in America, who was also a Democrat. But basically, the model of slavery, the model of democratic socialism, is that a handful of elite, mostly white, mostly coastal, socialist supremacists get rich by doing almost no work themselves, by confiscating the fruits of the labors of the people who give them power, today's Democratic Party voters. And in exchange, they will provide free housing, did that on the plantation, free food, did that on the plantation, free medical care, did that on the plantation, free education, did that on the plantation. Of course, it was only what the slave owners wanted them to have and want them to know. But democratic socialism and socialism in general is so antithetical to Judaism, so that while the other religions are problematic to socialism, Judaism is antithetical. You simply cannot embrace the tenets of Judaism and be a socialist. All right, I think if that sounded like a period or an exclamation point, I'll stop there.
That was great, Evan. No, thank you very much. It's really insightful and really interesting. We have a few questions here. I'll get to these. First one is, this is a long one, so I'll start with the longest one here. This is from one of our members, Ophir. I think you actually might know Ophir. In the 1980s/1990s, as the USSR was collapsing, I was asking people, how is it that we defeated socialism around the world while building a socialist economy in the USA? And people pushed back at me that weren't going socialist. If you define socialism as control of the means of production, as opposed to owning the means of production, we have a government control of the means of production. Every company looks to Washington for instructions, tax breaks, subsidies, etc., licenses and approvals from the EPA, IRS, DHS, etc. Today, it's much more obvious than it was 35 years ago. President Trump may have 8 years to undo 100 years of regulatory state, but what can we individually and as grassroots movement do to continue the movement back towards liberty and a less invasive bureaucracy? Some are saying it's time for a new Tea Party movement, and he says, I'm not so sure that the last one accomplished much of your, much at all. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. First of all, one of the reasons that it's hard to convince our friends and others is because the culture war, let's call it the culture war, which is nationalism, Americans who want to protect their sovereignty and their freedom of religion and these other things. Nationalism, once again, versus socialism, and so it's the same war under a different name. And wars are always fought in different ways. The Russians brought socialism to the world via revolution. The Soviets and the Chinese, for example, brought socialism and spread socialism via proxies in Vietnam and in Korea. Hitler brought socialism to the world and spread it through invasion. So there's been revolution, there's been invasion, there's been proxy, and by the way, you can have the Cold War and the attempted the maneuver, the tactic was attrition. Because there's attrition, there's revolution, there's invasion, and because in America it's subversion, because it's actually coming from within, it's a little harder to detect, and we good people dropped the ball along the way. What happened was in the 1960s, when the first democratic socialists came out, and we called them radicals, but they had exactly the same ideology that they would become today once they've taken the name democratic socialism. In fact, many of them are the same people. William Ayers is still, now a propagandist for the revolution and whatnot. We kind of dropped the ball when we defeated them in the streets, when they were terrorists and murderers and blowing up buildings and kidnapping people and whatnot, and we defeated them in the streets, having defeated the German socialists, having defeated the Russian socialists, or at least having contained them later on to beat them in the Cold War. We sort of assumed, we dropped our guard. And what they did was they went underground and they went on what you guys might know as the long march through the institutions. Instead of trying to rile the populace up to rise against America, which they couldn't do, because the American people had just fled socialism in Nazi Germany. They had just fled socialism in the Soviet republics. And those who didn't flee it, millions more, were sent overseas to fight World War II and saw what German and Russian socialism did. And so when they got back to America, they had righteous grievances. I mean, we're talking about there were Jim Crow laws and whatnot. But they had real world experience with the horrors that the democratic socialists are promising under a new smiley face. And there's just a great story, a very telling story about when Muhammad Ali went to fight one of the great fights in Zaire, Africa. He went over there a month early so he could train there and be part of the culture and see his people. And when he got back to America, the press asked him, Muhammad, how did you find Africa? How'd you like Africa? Muhammad Ali, a man who didn't suffer microaggressions, who suffered real aggressions, or a man who didn't suffer cultural appropriations, who had things appropriated from him. Muhammad Ali, when he was asked how he found Africa, said, quote, "Thank God my granddaddy got on that boat." But this new generation having no experience whatsoever with socialism, having no experience whatsoever with poverty, with having no experience whatsoever with communicable diseases until coronavirus, which is why they're hysterical over it, who've had no real experience. When the democratic socialists that we call the radicals back in the 60s segued through the long march through the institutions, they recognized that they couldn't convince people who knew the real world to join them in their hateful attempts, so they would manufacture their own. They would start by taking over the education system and academia and use them as the ministries of indoctrination. They would take over the news and entertainment fields and use them as the ministries of propaganda. Nowadays, you could add there the social media outlets as their ministry of communications. And really, we let them do this, which is partly the curse of being lowercase l liberals. America's fault was not that we were too right-wing. Our fault was that we were too lowercase l liberal. And when we heard them saying these horrible things, we said, live and let live. You know, and that's a mistake that we made. And we find ourselves now in a very difficult situation. Because as the last of the great generations, as the last of the people who knew socialism, as the last of the people who had any interaction with people who had suffered at the hands of the socialists begin to die, and those weaned and brought up in these institutions now come more and more into power, we're more and more losing our ability to even use those things as our voices, which leaves us, here's the answer to the question. It was a long question, it was a long answer, but here's the answer. The one thing that we do have going for us is that while they control all of those things, we own the truth. And what we have to do is, while they can hit 1 million people at once with their lies, we have to be 1 million people talking one at a time to one person. And I have a program I call Adopt a Democrat. Because I don't, and this may surprise you, I don't, as a New York City born, Hollywood, in the entertainment industry Jew, I don't know a single person who votes Democrat. I don't know one. What I know is a lot of people who vote against Republicans. There is nobody, and you'll find this when I found this the very first time that I found myself at a Republican meeting. It was just after 9/11, and the leftists were doing what leftists do, which is finding excuses for how we provoked the attacks. How it was really our fault and whatnot. And I knew that they weren't going to fight the terrorists. In fact, their prescription to prevent further attacks was to be nicer to the terrorists. It's because they were mad at us because we provoked it. And I knew that I needed an ally in this war that was going to come. It was already in Europe, certainly all over the Middle East. It had almost won the entire world, in the Ottoman Empire. And it was now coming to America, and I knew this was a fight I had to fight, and I needed allies. So I went to my first Republican meeting. And when I walked in, I heard something that I had never heard, not in my liberal synagogue, not in on my liberal campuses, not from my liberal entertainment friends. I heard affirmative arguments for the things that the Republican believes. Every one of these people, now I might disagree with some of their conclusions, but every one of them can offer an affirmative reason for why capitalism works, why Judaism works, why America works. Whereas all my life, and up until just before my awakening, right, I had never heard an affirmative argument from the left about leftism. There were the platitudes, the self-serving platitudes, we care and we're fair. And other than that, it was, and everybody who disagrees with us is Hitler. Everybody who disagrees with us is a homophobe, a xenophobe. And what you have to do is twofold. One, recognize that most people who vote Democrat, especially most Jews, do not believe in socialism and the utopia of a godless one world society. All right. What they believe is that Republicans are even worse. And I think about blacks who vote for Democrats. And how do you do that when for 50 years blacks have run your city And you still have inordinate poverty, inordinate unemployment, rats in Baltimore, feces in San Francisco, disease in Los Angeles. And the only reason is because the leftists have succeeded in using their indoctrination, their propaganda, and their social communication to make us even worse. Voting for us would be beyond the pale because while they're incompetent, we're evil.
Wow.
All right? And what you need to do is buy your humanity and buy your intellect one-on-one with people, just one at a time. You know, we always feel like we have to take over the entertainment industry again, and that would be wonderful. Let's keep working towards it. But in the meantime, we've got to be one person who changes one person at a time. And while that seems daunting, like it'll take forever to change things and we don't have the time, consider this. If every one of us changes just one person, we've doubled our numbers.
Very true. Very true. Yeah, because I get that question constantly. I have no idea, why Jews vote Democrat or Democrat Socialist.
Oh, would you like to know why?
I'd love to know why. That's one of the questions. Yeah.
Okay, it always is. The two questions that I can almost always count on is why did Jews vote Democrat? And when they know I wrote Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher for 6 years, what the hell happened to Maher? But I'll take the Jewish question. First of all, in order to be called a Jew, when you say the Jews vote a certain way, in order to be called a Jew is different than any other religion that's out there. All right? To call yourself a Christian, you need to believe something. You need to believe that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior. If you believe that, then you're a Christian. If you don't believe that, then you're not a Christian. If you do believe that, there are certain rites and rituals, practices, behaviors, positions on the issues that you would naturally tend to take. But to call yourself a Muslim, you have to believe something. You have to believe that the Quran is the final testament of God and Muhammad, its perfect messenger. If you believe that, you're a Muslim. If you don't believe that, you're not a Muslim. If you do believe that, then there are certain rites and rituals, practices, behaviors, policies that you support, and so on that naturally tend to follow. But to be called a Jew, when they say Jews vote, you don't have to believe anything. All you have to do is have fallen out of a Jewish woman's womb. And if there's one thesis that works throughout this entire work that I'm working on right now, it's that human beings should be judged by their individual choices and behaviors, not by stereotypical traits ascribed to them by the powers that be, and certainly not the supremacist powers that be. Well, there is no, for the secular Jew, what Prager calls the non-Jewish Jew, all right, there is no choice to be Jewish. He just fell out of he was born to a Jewish woman. And there's no practice of Judaism. Right? So the overwhelming number of Jews who vote for, or by the way, in the Jews in the past, like Marx, Marx may have been a Jew by birth, but he certainly wasn't a Jew by any other definition of the word, and certainly not one who would have any ideological affiliation to the Jewish people. Right, so the vast majority of people who vote Jews, who vote Democrat, aren't Jews at all. They're secular Jews. They're non-Jewish Jews. And as has been said before, and I would articulate better if I had more time, I have a lot to say on it, but their religion is socialism. Right? So the powers that be are their God, et cetera, et cetera.
Nice. That makes sense.
I can even extrapolate from there if you like, because there are three more. There are three schools of active Judaism, Jews by choice. There's the Reform Jew, and Reform Jews are going to hate me for this, but tough.
It's okay. We like controversy, apparently.
There are Reform Jews, there's conservative Jews, and there's Orthodox Jews. The Reform Jew votes Democrat almost always because he too isn't really Jewish. What he does is what the supremacists and they do in other is he reforms the religion to his ideology, as opposed to reforming his ideology to comport with the religion. He's reformed Judaism to his ideology as opposed to the other way around. So he tends to vote with the non-Jewish Jew, the secular Jew, far more often than to say the conservative Jew, who, as his name would suggest, seeks to conserve biblical values and Jewish values. He does so with a certain recognition of is a word I'm looking for that's not compromise, but recognition that he lives in a secular world. And then there's the Orthodox Jew who votes almost exclusively against the leftists, who seeks to conserve the biblical and the Jewish values, but does so in communities of his own. So it's actually an almost direct diagonal line from non-Jewish Jews to Jews who reform Judaism, to those who seek to conserve Judaism, to the Orthodox Jew, that the more Jewish you are by practice and belief, the more likely you are to reject leftism and support the right.
I think you should give that talk to every synagogue in Dallas. It'll go over very well at all the reform schools.
Yeah, no, it never really does.
No. I got another question here from Kathleen Lieberman. Can you, wouldn't the best way to diffuse socialism in the US be to define and separate the states responsibly in response to federal and state issues? How do we weed out social issues out of the government interests?
Okay, not sure I heard the entire question, but it sounds similar to the first one, which is how best. It's always going to have to be grassroots. While we attempt to, one thing that I've noticed amongst my friends who really want to make a difference and have an opportunity to do this, they always start running for office at the congressional level. All of these neophytes who suddenly are going to replace Nancy Pelosi and win congressional seats. And we've got to start at the much more atomic level. It's got to start at the lowest level. It's got to start with the school boards. It's got to start with the water commission. It's got to start with there, not only because those allow you to make have more of a personal and local influence, but it also allows you to learn your trade, learn your craft, and being a politician is a craft. And the idea that Nancy Pelosi, you're going to beat her because your ideas are better, or because she's quite Machiavellian. She's quite skilled. She's quite and so what we really need to do is much more put the ego aside, and it's not necessary to become a congressman. We'll have congressmen. First and foremost, go do something in your community. Go be on your homeowners board. Just start local, and then if you remain serious and dedicated, you'll have a much better chance of someday becoming a congressman.
Right. Thank you for that. And another question we have is, can you explain the difference between libertarians and Republicans? How did the libertarians influence or affect the conservative movement in California?
Republican is I don't think the right word to use here. Republican is the organization, and it's an umbrella into which different ideologies go, whether it's libertarian. I think there are two other mainstream. There the three parts of the Republican Party, and I'm going to be simplifying it. But you got your big government capitalists. You've got your Mitt Romneys or who are big government, but they are capitalist. They are nationalists. They love America. They believe in national sovereignty. They don't hate religion. But you got your big, so it's mostly an economic answer, by the way. But you've got your big government Republicans. Then you've got your conservative Republicans. And these are actually the true liberals, lowercase l liberal, because what they seek to conserve is this liberal democracy. And they seek limited government. And then there's libertarians who seek minimal government. Just because the conservative seeks the amount of government that the Constitution ascribes and allows, whereas the libertarian would like even less than that, because just because the government can do it doesn't mean it should do it.
Gotcha. Time for a couple more questions here. For our young people out there, how do we combat this Democrat socialism that's taking hold of all of our college campuses? What are a couple of tips or advice, I guess, in short, that you would give to folks to try to combat that? Going back
look, it depends how serious they are about knowing, the nuts and bolts. And if you can get the opportunity to explain to them that socialism is not what we have in the Nordic states, because that's what they think. They think socialism is like Sweden's national healthcare and whatnot. And it was Rasmussen. I don't know how to pronounce his first name. Are we okay? Because my screen's kind of flashing.
No, you're good.
So,
You're good.
okay. But the prime minister of Denmark came to the Kennedy School of Political Science. That's not its exact name, at Harvard, though. The Kennedy School of Politics at Harvard University. So we're not talking just idiots on the streets. We're talking about the elite and the smartest and those who are being groomed to take over government, soon thereafter, and other institutions. And he felt compelled to tell them that I know many in America think that the Nordic model is the socialist model. I cannot be more clear about it. It is not. Denmark is a free market, is a capital, is a market-driven economy. All right, so the prime minister of Denmark is telling you it's not. In fact, if you want to put the Nordic system on the left-right continuum, because the left has become so radical left with socialism, which had never appeared on our spectrum before, now being the mainstream of the Democratic Party, the Nordic model would actually fall right of center in America. See, left and right, the debate used to be, it was never about whether America's great. John Kennedy loved America, as much as Richard Nixon did, or up until very recently, it wasn't America is evil versus America is good, which is what the Democratic and Republican parties' argument is now. It was basically about rates of taxation, not government ownership but relative rates of taxation and relative size of government. And that debate now that used to take place between the left and the right, the left wanted more, the right wanted less, now takes place wholly in the Republican Party. All right? On the big government side, which would have been John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, you now have these people who are now what we call rhinos, Republicans in name only, because a few generations ago they would have been Democrats. But there's no room in the Democratic Party for anything other than socialist extremism. And so the Nordic states would be part of that debate, because their debate isn't about nationalism. Right? They want to protect their borders. They believe in their national sovereignty. All right? It's not about socialism. They reject socialism. And it's not about anti-religionism, because they happen to be amongst, not only, in some ways, they're even further to the right when it comes to religion, because they have religious parties in government. They don't have separation of church and state like the American conservative wants. All right? So we have to disabuse them of this idea that the Nordic states are the socialism Democrats will bring about once they're empowered. And then hopefully you'll have begun to whet their appetite. One mistake that we make is it is so obvious that we are right. Right? Not in every policy prescription, but America is exceptional. Right? Judaism is good. Nationalism, safe and protected borders are helpful, etc. That if we just explained it to them, they would come around. It's really very much like raising a child. In fact, by the way, that's why my original book was called The Kindergarten of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks. Because the child does not have the intellectual wherewithal to discriminate. And therefore, the Democratic Socialists believes we can have paradise if we return everybody to the moral and intellectual level of the indiscriminate. And so if you try to make everything a teaching moment, they're going to rebel against you, just like a child would rebel if everything you did with them was a teachable moment. Right? Have fun with them, enjoy them, love them, laugh with them, go to a ball game with them. But when you have an opportunity to plant a seed or to water an idea, if something pops up in front of them, you say, see, that's what I was talking about the other day. So don't make this a fight where you have to win. And I find myself doing it all the time on the internet with strangers. And it's really not wise, but it's fun. And nonetheless, if you're trying to change one person in your life, it's a much better way to recognize that, like raising a child, it might take 18 years. All right? But again, all we all have to do is change one person, and there are twice as many of us.
That was great. I think we'll end it with one last question. Hopefully, I'm not putting you on the spot too much, but do you have a new conservative joke that you can tell us and
Oh
and a
my.
light note here? Is
Oh
that
my,
too
I
much
thought of it
pressure?
this morning. It's funny because I worked in so many different media that when I'm focused on one, I'm not so much focused on the other. And right now, I'm just really deadly focused on getting the book that the speech came from just now out in time to start to percolate and maybe perhaps make a difference in the coming election. So sorry guys, there's no joke that really comes to mind at the moment.
That's
But
all.
I will
That's
tell
all.
you, next time I think of one, I will email it to you exclusively, Benji, and you will send it out exclusively to the people who are here.
I know you will. No, I appreciate it. Well, no, thank you so much, Evan. This has been really informative and interesting. And everybody, please go buy Evan's book, Apocalypse Now. It's available on Amazon. It's a
And by
great
the way, can I
read.
add one more thing, Benji,
Please,
very
please.
quickly? You know what? If you want to see my jokes, I actually have a comedy special. If you're a member of Amazon Prime, you can watch it for free. It's an hour-long special called Evan Sayet, A Deplorable Mind. And even though we did it, I think 2 years ago now, because of my style and what I write, it's evergreen. So it's as fresh today if you're seeing it for the first time as it would have been had you seen it.
It's very funny. No, I've seen it. It's great. So no, thank you for mentioning that. Evan, if there's anything else or good to go. Well, thank you so
Yep,
much,
no,
Evan.
I think that should do it. Do me a favor, get me a copy of the video because I'd like
Of
to see it,
course,
share it,
of course, of
and
course.
other than that, I'm good.
All right, awesome. Well, hey, everybody, I really appreciate everyone making some time today to watch this and to hear Evan. Check out our next event. Here we are, the virtual town hall with our Dallas County Commissioner JJ Koch. You won't want to miss it. You'll be able to ask all sorts of questions of JJ. I know everyone's very interested on how they're going to be reopening Texas and Dallas and the safe and efficient way of doing so, as well as many other hot topics. You're going to be able to ask all your questions. Again, virtual town hall with Dallas County Commissioner JJ Koch. It's Thursday, April 30th at 7:30 p.m. So it should be a very interesting date because I think the end of April is a lot of things are supposed to be happening, according to what I've heard at least from Governor Abbott and other elected officials in Dallas and surrounding areas. So hope you all will join us, and I will see you all soon. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care and have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.